really up in the fore of people's minds as a very real possibility. When you talk about a fence, that's a very practical matter. It's kind of like these big containers and the razor wire and all this is designed to create a sense of shock and awe and like, it's just impossible, what can be done. But for the university, this is a bureaucratic and a practical reality. They're spending millions of dollars to maintain it. They're spending millions of dollars for security. It could be spent on student services. It could be spent on housing. It could be spent on literally anything else but a bunch of costs and fences. And the only way that it can stay up is really if the students and the workers in the university kind of consent to their funds and their university allocated resources. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about free fence. We're kind of talking about seeing this as a practical reality. And we're going to see in the archives how people over the years have kind of addressed this. And going back to the 60s we have, and then we'll get into the 2000s and some of the later stuff. And talk about the park not just as a site of like destruction and apocalypse, but the park as a site of like joy and good music at times and all that kind of stuff. Another thing I want to mention is that it seems like every single corporation or institution is spending millions of dollars on fences right now. Like everywhere you go, like everything's being fortified, everything's being secured, everything's being fortified basically. And so it's like who's actually doing the work of trying to like create real community spaces? Who's trying to think outside of this kind of like security, like fenced off mindset and do this really hard work with like no resources, almost at all, to create community spaces. And that's kind of what People's Park has been about from the beginning. One of the things I want to mention is just the portions of this event are going to be recorded, and also because of the title and the nature of the event, it's possible that somebody could be listening in. So just be mindful when you say, throw out ideas, it's just hypothetical, it's an idea. You don't want to say anything. It's like incriminating in any way, basically. I also mentioned that some of the topics we're going to talk about tonight that are these materials are pretty heavy. So if you feel like you're overwhelmed, feel free to step out, step downstairs, get a drink at the bar. Go right ahead. Alright, so I'm going to give a quick background about People's Park was created back in 1969. There was an anonymous ad in the Berkeley Bar to create the park. Yeah, can people not hear me? Okay. I'm going to take off. Okay. A little bit better? Good. It's better. So People's Park was created in April 1969. People responded to this anonymous ad in the Berkeley Bar to create the park. The land that's there had been bulldozed during finals week of 1968, where the university kicked out all of the students and the people who were living in the buildings that were there. And they kicked them out and they said, we're going to redevelop this basically. But they didn't do anything with it. It became a muddy lot and it became basically a parking lot for the university. And that's how it was for quite a while. So in April, people took it back. They came back with sod, they came back with grass, and they said basically we're reclaiming this land for community use. Almost immediately, the university fenced it off again. And they said, you can't do that. That's our land, that's our title. We just took that, this whole process, we bulldozed everything. That's our land. And that precipitated the events of Bloody Thursday, May 15th, 1969. The National Guard was called in to Berkeley. They basically put the city under military occupation. Hundreds were injured by police. Tear gas was sprayed over almost the entire city. And one person, James Rector, was killed. It's kind of amazing to see that history in some ways get repeated in 2024. The city of Berkeley under like this partial occupation by police, checkpoints, extreme use of force, basically. And it's just amazing how many of the headlines that we have here in these archives still have echoes today. So it's important to remember that the park was founded in '69, but it was not until 1972 that the fences actually came down for good. There was a protest against Nixon's plan to drop some mines in Vietnam, and they were kind of doing their protest thing. And they're like, hey, let's take down that fence. And that's what they did, this big group of people. And that was kind of the point at which the university gave up. So throughout the park's history, it's kind of like, you could think of it, I like to think of it a little bit like an herb, like sometimes the herb is like, it's blooming and it's, and it's producing all of those plant medicine or a flower or something like that. And sometimes, it's not in the it's the winter season, it's the cold season, it's kind of like that. And I think the park is the same way. Sometimes it's in bloom and sometimes it's really struggling to survive. It's been fenced off. Exactly the same. Another theme that you'll see in these documents is like the connection with anti-imperialist activity. In a lot of these documents, side by side next to the park, is stories about Palestine, stories about Vietnam, stories about things like this. And the park has always kind of had like this parallel with their struggles as being in the orbit of organizers, who are working on those types of topics, but also, this site of struggle itself, basically, the site of organizing. And this is a fun newspaper. So this is from May 24th, '69. And it says, UC faculty votes 642 to 95 to get rid of park fence. So this is cool. And when everybody says like, oh, you're talking about defencing, like that's crazy, that's edgy, that's like whatever. Well, you could say, well, the faculty voted 642 to 95 to defense BK Park. All right. So now I want to turn it over to Luca here to talk about what happened in the student occupation of 2021.
Yes, vaguely 2020, 2021. Okay, if I'm not correct, so I'll talk 2021. So 2020, the UC comes in without warning. Not the UC specifically, but a contracting company that they got better tree services, greater tree services. Some group came in at about 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning one day, 2020, and this was while students were on break and away from campus, and began cutting down trees. One of our comrades who lived directly next to the park noticed this, started alerting people, and a protest started forming pretty rapidly. In response to this protest, the police called in backup to put up fences around the park, which were immediately removed. Shout out to whoever did that. And that launched like a new era of people paying a little bit more attention to the park and thinking about the park more intentionally, following an era of the park having been mostly an encampment space over the pandemic, because the UC and the city of Berkeley had changed laws around camping to allow people to camp in the park, to say that we will not have any difficulty, we won't evict people that are camping in the park. Then the tree cutting down happened. The timelines are a little fuzzy, so I apologize if any specific dates on this are wrong, but a few months later, they randomly come and dump like a bunch of mulch and tree stumps and logs and like these giant unmovable objects and just piles of shit. And they just dump those there, and then they're like, well, we were doing construction up in the hills. and now they're here to have fun. Following few months, there is another effort. I believe they phrased this one as they needed to do soil sampling for the upcoming building project, which is the building project happening right now. So they released those plans ahead of time. They stated that they were going to be doing soil sampling, and when they rolled in, they came in with like military grade fences, the same types of fences they use to reinforce the Capitol building in DC. Those were allegedly broken open with a normal person's normal pair of like Home Depot style bolt cutters. Fun little note. But yeah, so fences went up then. The community was protesting. There were a lot of people like directly on front lines fighting cops to prevent just the further cutting down of trees. They cut down over 100 trees that year. And once the fences got open, very spontaneously, without any prior planning, someone shouted "sleepover," and a 3-month occupation began. It was very. There was no initial plan going into that. That wasn't a planned occupation protest. It was a naturally emerging occupation protest. There were a lot of lessons learned along the way, because like it wasn't a thing emerging of people of entirely cohesive ideologies. It wasn't like one AG or little spokes of AGs organizing. It just emerged and happened, and had to figure out how to deal with that. And that lasted for almost 3 months of 24/7 presence in the park. And following that, continued with still a ton of presence from those people in the park all the time. In the early few weeks of that, there was a 24/7 medic tent and a 24/7 food and water and supplies tent. The medic tent was the hardest thing to keep staffed because there are not a lot of medics in the Bay right now that do protest medicine. Having 3 people do a 24/7 rotation is not realistic or fair or one. So that shut down after about 2 weeks, but stayed up as a pop-up. The food and supplies tent later got converted into building a physical kitchen structure in the park, and that was a many-month process of many iterations. But basically went from a tent where we stored all the food and snacks and whatnot into items out of pallets and found material and almost entirely donation things, building a like cube structure which was supplies and storage, and there's a grill and we can serve from in here. A couple months later, that converted into Thunderdome, which is somehow people built like a giant dome fence around this, which existed for a few months. And that was cool and wonderful, and then at some point, a ladder got built from the roof of that kitchen into the tree, and the tree house was built up there, which served as an occupation plan for January of this year. Lots of cool developments, lots of spicy drama, but that group, which was made up of a lot of groups and a lot of individuals, managed to hold that space for almost 3 months straight, and in that time establish a more permanent presence so that when the 24/7 ended, it was still known, like, hey, protesters aren't gonna let you get away with shit. That's kind of it. I have 3 months of experience at one specific occupation protest, so like I love talking about that. But also I don't have the experience with that one occupation protest. But if people ever want to talk occupation protests, hi.
Thank you so much. Great. Alright. So next I'd like to invite up David, who's back there doing the video camera, to say a few words about his research, his music, He produced an album called 53 Years of Resistance. That's one of the things that's on that
How y'all doing? How y'all doing? Peace. Yeah, I'm an artist. I'm a street performer. And I also am like a witness to hip hop and guitar. And I just remember a time where if you were a dope artist, you had to go to Telegraph, do your shit on the street. And really, I've been doing like a lot of research and a lot of just holding on to the Bay Area for what it should be, and then to be like to see what it is and what it's become in regard to like turn the noise down, even on Telegraph, and I've been like waiting to see street performers on like even in like the world famous spots to do, it's just really rough right now for free speech, because I feel like the street performers experience is kind of like the free speech opportunities. Because if we could really do our thing, we could do them where we want to do it, and it would be a lot different. But a lot of times, so I got towed by the police during filming of my art. And some of you can say, oh yeah, well you pulled over in the wrong spot. That's true, not here to lie to you. But there's more to it, there's more to it. This is the second time that they got me. And before this exchange was done, they had some tactics that were like, like get your hands out of your pockets or don't touch me. They're telling me that, and that's like that's a high level like threat of cooperation. Like if you don't cooperate with this, you know what could happen to you if I was parked in a red zone that the security painted red, basically.
There was never an official announcement that that was done. Just maybe done now.
But yeah, they said they knew who I was, and they kind of like, they're like, yeah, no, we know exactly who you are. Somebody said that, and I just really feel strongly about Telegraph being a epicenter for free speech, and like a noisy place if need be, a place where the protest is going to begin, a place where the street performer can do his thing, a place where, well, right now, I just feel like there's no place to feed the poor. So one attribute to all the negatives of People's Party, this and that, People's Party bring this type of people, that type of people, but Food Not Bombs is able to feed a lot of people through that as a gathering spot. And losing that is just an example of something that we're losing in the Bay Area. And I got a little more to say, but I don't know if I'm doing it. Okay. So, well, first of all, before I go into the next part, are there any questions? Any questions? Everybody up to speed? August 4th, January, August 3rd. So I shot and directed a project called 53 Years of Resistance, based off the painting. So 53 Years of Resistance People's Park documentary. It's a little documentary shot by me that it's like an hour long. It's on YouTube. You can find it. It doesn't have a ton of views, but in that, it's kind of like I show the artistic side of what really Telegraph has to offer. And if I can, I like to share a little piece of art with y'all. That's cool. We don't have the speaker, so I'm gonna kind of, I'm a poet, I'm a street performer, I'm also a rapper, but I just want to share with you a little something I made. I consider it like music made for Telegraph in a sense, in my head. But I'll be sharing a poem and some excerpts from 53 Years of Resistance, the album. But the first part is like this. This is the dilemma, in my opinion. The UC Berkeley newsletter turns students to minions. And the matter state fees, students pay as loco. They graduate them all day, but won't graduate locals. This caused a housing crisis in my focal. That's why we must resist and take the fight with the moguls. They trying to pull a land grab, use the chancellor's mansion. Everybody knows it's haunted, use that for expansion. But People's Park, we fought for that. So if they want to take it, we can run it back. And so, yeah, that was my one. Woo! And yeah, you know, the fight for People's Park is a fight for free speech. You know, people want to know what side of the revolution you're on. Berkeley free speech movement is a real movement. It was a big part of the civil rights era, and this next piece is kind of just about the core of me as an artist, the core of like why I consider myself a freedom fighter and even a fighter for free speech. You know, there's a poem called "Modern Day Slave." Modern day slave. Have you heard the term modern day slave? Have you given it any thought, or is it just what they say? They deserve the sentences they were served. A chance for repentance to occur. You got nerve to say they shouldn't pay. I mean, after all, life is a little game. But who said it had to be a baseball game? 3 strikes turn my life into a baseball game. Pay your debt to society, but still carry shame. Answer questions about your past, you better not be who's to blame. Because if anything pops up, better hope it's not your name. Because you didn't get a job, and you better not rob, or we're bringing you to pain. Trust in God. That's what the chaplains say. I got a question, chaplains say. Have you heard the term modern day slave? By 15, I realized that they drugged my vision. My pseudo-thuggish living, doctor-prescribed drug addiction, plus marijuana and other afflictions like love is missing. I realized that they drugged my vision. They told me who I was. At risk, out of control, broken home, criminal that couldn't be left alone, destined to be a deadbeat dad, get the sex and gone, destined to be abusive, destined to be addicted, destined to be a dropout, and destined to be in prison. Indoctrination. There's no such thing as boys will be boys if he don't act like them other boys. He needs these pills, and that's real indoctrination. Society was built on hunting and farming, but as the world progressed, there's no hunting, just farming. So a hunter like me is useless. Indoctrination. So a lot of what drives me is that there is oppression in the land. There is serious discrimination and oppression in the land, in the 510 right now. And People's Park and the fight for People's Park and the fight for, basically, they shouldn't have put that big fence there before this upcoming trial. So they're just spending money to show like, man, you think we're tripping? You know, it's an intimidation tactic. They're blowing millions to say like, well, hopefully that wasn't a waste of money, and just get the edge through the news. They got spin doctors involved. They got people that can tell the police, not the police, sorry, the news how to report it. And that's a spin doctor, you know what I mean? So they got spin doctors involved, and it's serious. So I have one last thing. I'm Daveed, that's Daveed. I got one more to share with you. I'm gonna pass it on. But at the beginning of my turning 18, Oscar Grant had lost his life at the BART station. I was 18 years old. And I wrote about that, and I felt like that was kind of like the beginning of my official journey, just like as an activist. I was like, man, fuck this shit, you know. But in 2009, when they killed Oscar Grant, we had to take the freeway, we had to take a stand. We had to let the world know that we ain't gonna take it. They just killed a man, and we gonna make him famous. You want him to be nameless, but we remember names. Rest in peace to Oscar Grant, we remember names. And if they kill one of yours, we gonna do the same. And that's my commitment. Fuck the system, man. Woo. Thank you guys, let me be a part of this. And we're gonna go on with the show and open up the discussion. Anybody got something to say? No. Hey, I'm David, D-A-H-V-E-E-D. Alameda County.
Also, you want to talk about your car and how you're looking for?
Yeah, does everybody follow the People's Park page? Okay, so I got towed, and then I'm gonna do like a mutual aid request later. I don't want to think about it right now. But if you guys all follow the Instagram, you know, tomorrow or the day after, there'll be something you can share. I got towed and targeted by the police. I performed, what was that, January 4th? When everything happened. I pulled up like at like 2 a.m. or 1 o'clock with the speaker fully charged, and we were jamming. And so sometimes when things like that happen, they can look at you like an organizer, even though I just come out renegade. I'm just a street performer, you know, but I seen like, oh shit, they're out there. So yeah, anyway, there'll be a post about if you want to share to help me either get my truck out the tow, which is hella money, or get something new. I need a little tour van or something. I am an active father, but it's not about me. It's about, you know, People's Park forever. You know, we need free speech in the city. And the tow was just a little something. That's the second time they got me, actually. They got me for a car in 2021. But, you know, it's all a part of it. That's part of the discriminatory policing that I'm talking about and the oppression that's in the land, you know. So anyway, let's open it up for discussion.
Thanks, Tommy.
Yeah, thank you.
Alright. I've had that conversation made me kind of curious about something. And it makes me realize like how much we're missing the park. Because we like in another universe we would be having this conversation in the park. That's always been like, you know, basically the organizing space, you know, like the culture, like everything is kind of in that sector. So I'm kind of curious, is there people who haven't actually like set foot in People's Park before the fence went up?
Yeah. Hi, I'm John Harris. I was in the 1969 People's Park demonstrations, most of them. Luckily, one of the few People's Park demonstrations that I missed was the Bloody Thursday demonstration, which was both bloody and deadly. That might be the reason why I'm alive and here today. But anyway, to quickly zoom to today, I'd just like to say a few brief words about what I see as an important similarity to back then, an important difference from back then, and finally, another thing we could possibly learn from is Tamarac's excellent example right here of an office conversion. So those are the three main points. What's the big similarity between now and the 60s? So the gentleman just spoke about the free speech movement. And a big similarity to now and then is that the UC Berkeley administrators in the pre-free speech era had to be brought around to update their old-fashioned, outmoded thinking. Because in the pre-free speech era, UC Berkeley administrators were thinking, well, heck, we run this place, so we can decide what gets to be said or does not get to be said here. But over time, there were a lot of demonstrations, a lot of negotiations, and they were brought around to change their outmoded thinking. They finally realized, well, of course, there's the First Amendment. Of course, there's free speech. Of course, we can speak about anything on the campus. So that's how the free speech went, the movement. Now, a very similarity is that UC Berkeley administrators once again got their thinking really outdated, because this People's Park project, the student housing project, it was approved by the UC Board of Regents in September 2021. And if you go right now to the UC Student Housing People's Park Project website, if you go there right now on your phones, you'll see the first sentence on that People's Park Project website says, we planned for 5 years on our People's Park housing project. That means before the Regents approved it in September 2021, they were starting their planning way back in 2016. This is an ancient financial era. We're in a whole new financial era now due to the work from home pandemic-induced revolution, which, as the Tamarack people well know, has brought down the prices of these office buildings and makes these office buildings excellent candidates for conversions to places like this, and potentially to solve the student housing crisis, because there are big office buildings that are going for fire sale prices in downtown Berkeley, downtown Oakland, downtown San Francisco. So we just got to bring their thinking up to date about these big bargains here, just like this place, for conversions to student housing. So that's the similarity. We got to bring the thinking around up to date. What's the big difference? I gave a talk at Sprout Plaza a couple Fridays ago. And it was like basically speaking to the choir. We had a small group there, and I saw so many students walking by, hardly even noticing our talk. What were they thinking? Well, a lot of these students are thinking that, where the heck am I going to live next semester? Where am I going to live next year? So they read the UC Berkeley propaganda about the student housing project and think, oh, student housing, excellent, exactly what we need. But we got to educate the students and the UC Berkeley administrators to this new financial era that we're in. And that's my final point. We got to educate people about the use of office buildings available at fire sale prices that can be converted to student housing, rather than demolishing People's Park and getting rid of precious open space in a time of anthropogenic global warming. Imagine that, cutting down trees at a time like this and getting rid of open space. We need to preserve that open space. It makes no financial sense in purely financial terms to spend over $400 million on this student housing project. UC Berkeley administrators already admit that that amount inflated by 33% just since the approval back in September 2021. At that time, the project was estimated to cost $312 million. Now they admit it's already up to over $400 million. Not only that, the financing is over $1 billion over decades. So forget blowing $1 billion on destroying People's Park. That money is much better spent on these office to housing conversions. You can do several for that amount, over $400 million. Right now, there is a fire sale office building available because in downtown Berkeley, 1 block from UC Berkeley, there's an office building where the owner defaulted on a $10 million loan, which is peanuts compared to the over $400 million UC wants to spend on the People's Park project. So imagine how many of these conversions could be built into student housing for that amount of over $400 million. You can essentially solve the student housing crisis. So we
Thank
need
you
to
for
educate
that.
people about office to dorm conversions. UC Berkeley administrators need to learn about this. UC students need to learn about this, and we should seek negotiations with UC Berkeley administrators to talk about these things. And I won't get into it, I'll close right now, but there's so many things that UC Berkeley could be doing with people's small parts of it while leaving most of it open.
Thank you for speaking. Yeah.
So you would know this best. What do you think about the chancellor moving on and the potential of a new chancellor having either a hostile or a more beneficial means of part, because it's a different chancellor, it's a different opportunity for UC's leadership. Can you just answer it really quickly?
Thank you, David. And I've got, the Supreme Court cases starting the arguments this week. And I've heard that they might be slow walking that case for one of the reasons that you just mentioned, that the chancellor's going to retire in June, so there might be hope that there's going to be a new administration that's more open-minded. I think my speculation is that right now there might be one or two, maybe more UC Berkeley administrators who are sitting there quietly, disgusted at the Trump-like border wall around the park now, and they may very well be counting the days till Chris is gone and we can get new people in there that are more open-minded, and so that's what we've got to hold on to and try to seek people, reasonable-minded people to negotiate.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. All right. Next, I'd like to invite up Eddie. I'll let you introduce yourself so you can figure out how you want to represent yourself.
Yeah, I am. I'm an archivist. I work with Freedom Archive and KPFA and HKU and Collection and Ethnic Studies Library. And a lot of these materials that are here came from that archive. And I was, I just want to say a word about, I think, the 1987 to 1992 struggle, because it doesn't get talked about a lot, but I really think it was actually the high point of the park and the greatest victory. And I think we just don't talk about it a lot, and we always compare it to the 60s, and the 60s, I would never deny is more important where it came from. But I think the 90s, 80s struggle was more recognizable to our experience today. Capitalism was more recognizable, neoliberalism, the so-called homeless crisis, which was sort of new in the 80s, right? So it's a very different social situation. And the struggle in that period, I think, we could actually learn more from it. And the main reason to say that is because we won. Right? I mean, 1972, you remember, that's when the fence came down. So 69 to 72, it was a defeat. It was a parking lot, basically. And then, by 87, they started really a counterinsurgency campaign in the South Side. Berkeley was a different place. I mean, rent was affordable, tuition was very low. I was there in both those situations. It gave people more space to agitate. There was tons of activity going on. What was the tuition?
That's gonna make a lot mad.
I mean, it was going up, but around 600 a semester total. So, but the rent is a really shocking thing. 300, so, and even compared to the 60s, people were complaining, but people had time and space, and so it was just a very, but it's more recognizable. I think than the 60s. I think as a social landscape, and so I think we always jump to the 60s, and I think it's because it's important, but really those struggles in the 80s and 90s, they were larger in number, more people participated, but we generally don't remember them. I think with the exception of Earth First and ACT UP, that's what I get the sense of, but not the Central American Solidarity, South Africa as much. But the park was the university, so one other thing I think was more similar was the kind of, I call it counterinsurgency, the kind of ways, they had learned a lot from the militarization, especially during the anti-apartheid movement. They had the mutual aid thing, they had all the police techniques, and they tried and they failed. There was a multi-year campaign. It started off as a war against crime, so-called on the South Side, which was basically an anti-black youth campaign, right? And there were multiple riots that took place. The big one was in '89. Some of these documents here, explain all this. The '89 riot was sort of funny because mutual aid failed because there was a heavy metal riot in Hayward, apparently. and a frat thing going on. So just people just took over the avenue, right? And so there was. But long story short, with the volleyball courts, their idea, I think they learned from this, is we're going to build a volleyball court and pay some guy to play beach volleyball there. And it was a complete, it was an own goal, right? People just had so much fun with it. The biggest kitty litter box, people took their cat litter there. They put Bob Sparks, there was an incredible, generation of radical, street, folks who from the '60s but found themselves unhoused. John Michael Jones. I just want to shout out all these comrades. And Bob Sparks took a chainsaw to that volleyball court, and that chainsaw is at the Ashkenaz to this day. If you go to Ashkenaz, David Nadal, who was subsequently murdered, he found the Ashkenaz, and he got all those bands, this whole repertoire of bands that would play all the park shows. It was amazing, the music that took place. So in any case, I just want to shout out that history is part of the story, and I think also, it bought 30 years more of years in the park. 91 was this epic battle. Another person died. That was Rosebud, and basically it's 30 more years, which is a lot longer than that first battle. And I think the university was so scared of what happened. They so underestimated the response. But again, I think the transition, the university, the student body, and the community of Berkeley were in that transition. They were no longer what they had been. So there was student support, but again, it had changed. And I really think we have to understand the idea of the park in '69 at a time of full employment, much more economic prosperity. It was a bit different. By the late '80s, early '90s, you have recognizably what we have today, which is just massive destitution, basically, it's a different, right? The United States is no longer, this inspiration to the world, which it was to some, people that didn't know any better, as this affluent society. And then that was sort of this hinge moment. It was sort of new, shocking to folks. People were trying to do something about it. And that was, so I don't know, what the real, lesson is, the university can win the battles but lose the war. That's happened time and time again. And we'll see this time, but I feel like we have to be aware, that the slogans and even the meaning of the park, 69, 70, maybe that's not resonating with students, as much. I'm not sure. I feel like we should emphasize other dimensions of it, and one of them being, I would periodize it historically as the birth of environmentalism 2.0 or whatever it was. It's one of those moments. Environmental justice, you can sort of put it in that narrative. But whatever the university is still obsessed with it, maybe that's the final point. The amount of money they're spending on this site shows that for them, that history is still frightening. And it still means something to them. And we have to make sure our historical memory is better than theirs.
Eddie, we're so grateful to you for sharing your archives with us. And a lot of the materials that are out on the tables today are things that Eddie has shared with us, or reproductions of it. So we're incredibly grateful. Also, I'll shout out Aaron Aarons, who some of the items came from. His archives, he passed away.
Here's some of the agitators. Before the slingshot, is an article I wrote under a pseudonym back then. These are extras, so I'll just put them on a stack there, and then some other
Can I get more?
struggles.
Of course. I got a ton of animals.
That was
Always. Which one were you thinking of?
So I'd like to invite up our last presenter. After this, we'll kind of break out and look at the table, and then we'll have a free speech discussion where we just talk about what's in the archives, what things resonate today, what things are interesting for students. I give you a little bit of background too, so we have different sections basically. So over there, those two tables covers the 80s and 90s. Both the park defense, what Eddie was talking about on Telegraph Avenue, is kind of the counterinsurgency basically and resistance to that, and also the anti-apartheid movement. Over here, this covers mostly the 1960s, 1969, the creation of the park. And then over here we have a smattering of more modern material. All right. So I want to introduce Harlan Steele. Harlan is a PhD candidate at UC Davis, who's going to be talking a little bit about what is known as Occupy Oakland, or the Oakland Commune, and yeah, some story from more recently from the area radicalism in the 2000s.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sylvia. Thanks for asking me to swing by. I guess. Okay, so I'm a second-generation defender of People's Park. My bio dad, T.W. Smith, you can find him holding a pig in the Berkeley Barb in the issue that was printed roughly 2 or 3 weeks after People's Park was created. I got to find this out many years later, as my other bio parent did not want me to have anything to do with the situation. Ended up having us move up to the Pacific Northwest. I came down here and eventually found out the whole history of People's Park as part of the Slingshot Collective like 12 years ago. Got to take part in Occupy Oakland and hung out at Hilarity House for a little bit, kind of in the weeks as things were fomenting. And I mean, a lot of folks look at these movements like Occupy Oakland and People's Park and they tend to whitewash them. Like the free speech movement is hella whitewashed. People forget the reality that the free speech movement started in a moment with a police car. Why was that police car there? Because Jack Weinberg was trying to talk about what was happening to Black people in the United States. He had taken part in Freedom Summer. It was the autumn after 1964, Freedom Summer. All these Berkeley students, all these white students wanted to educate themselves. They went to the South, they came back. They were setting up tables for CORE, the Congress of Racial Equity. That's what Jack Weinberg was tabling about when he was arrested in 1964 on the UC Berkeley campus. This wasn't just any free speech. This was a specific kind of speech, that the administration has been trying to suppress all along, that the corporate powers, that the America KKK has been trying to suppress all along. Sorry. Okay.
Thank you for saying it.
The free speech movement started and has always been about voicing what is going on with racial inequity in the United States. When the police came to grab Jack Weinberg and tell him you can't be tabling for CORE on this campus because we don't allow that kind of speech here, thousands of students showed up and they sat around the police car. They would not move their bodies, like over 1,000 students for over 24 hours. And the roof of that police car became a forum, it became a stage. And on the roof of that police car, Jack Weinberg and hella other people, they got up and they spoke about Freedom Summer, they spoke about what was on their minds. The free speech movement was born, and the free speech movement was always about bringing folks in from the civil rights movement. They brought in Martin Luther King Jr., who spoke at Skills Hall, thanks to the free speech movement. They brought in Kwame Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael. They were bringing in speakers from the civil rights movement, Black speakers, to explain to these Berkeley students what is going on in the United States. It has always ever been about that. People's Park, after 5 years of building this movement, was the moment when the free speech movement took land. And I had the opportunity to interview Mike Delacour, Rest in Power comrade. I had the opportunity to interview him when we awarded him the Wingnut of the Year award for Slingshot about 10 years ago. And we had a good conversation about how Mike's role with the free speech stage You know, the free speech stage was created to replicate the roof of that police car. And the role, you know, Mike would play would be to say, okay, here's your 10 minutes, each person gets a moment to come and speak, and then, you know, he'd also kind of usher them off the stage, but it was this mediation role, and he took it very seriously. You know, those who were caretakers of the park took the idea of having a user-developed space very seriously. So everybody gets a chance to speak. We are here to make sure that oppressions that are being pushed under the rug are being voiced. Right now, free speech is under threat in the United States, often in the name of free speech. There's this double think thing to say, oh, you're limiting my free speech by what, you know, fuck that noise. Like, we know what the free speech movement is actually about. We know what People's Park is actually about. And everything that's happening in Florida right now, in Texas, with DeSantis and all those too many angry words for them. With those folks, those raging racist nut jobs, limiting what you can say on a university campus right now. You know, people are fleeing the universities in Florida because they can't speak about the actual history of the United States. Everything that's happening there is the same thing that's happening to People's Park. They've enclosed the park, they've taken the park, this is interrelated. They are taking our spaces away from us that are intersected with this movement of voicing these things. What else was I gonna say? Oh, the university has like, I believe it's 7 or 8 other properties that they could develop. This was never about, oh, we don't have enough land, that isn't lie. They have been trying to take People's Park since 1969. Do not believe their lies. Do not let this movement get whitewashed. Do not let the critical race theory element of it get pushed under the rug. And also, like, so there was this thing that the Yippies did apparently where they had this, they were running for president called Pegasus. I'm just gonna throw that out there, but okay, Occupy Oakland. The last quick thing I'm gonna say, just sometimes, I don't know, what was the thing about Occupy Oakland? Was anyone here present for Occupy Oakland? If you want to share, you don't have to. So, I mean, the thing Sylvia thought was very interesting as someone who lived through that. Occupy Oakland was a moment when a lot of social movements came together. Occupying space does that. It brings together different spaces, different narratives, different understandings. The environmental movement, People's Park hippies, folks doing squatting, like when everyone, you know, everyone showed up. So there's something to ponder about occupations and fomenting that. Yeah. And I'm just gonna leave it on that. But anyway.
You have a question?
Yeah, that was
So, yeah, 100%. So I've been a park activist like full time since 2018, like nonstop, every single day of living. And you know what I saw is the first thing the UC wanted to do was erase the Black community. Like, how many Black speakers do you see that have the articulation to speak to other people not being invited to the event, right? And so what I see on Sproul is the way that UC has gone around it is that even if you have an authentic claim, you're invisible, you're silenced, you don't get media attention. How do we make a space now where occupation isn't the goal, isn't the prime objective, but liberation of the voice of oppressed people?
Yeah. I just really like that question. I don't think I have an answer for it. I hope everyone in the room is being taking information for that. I don't know. Yeah, thank you.
All right. So, is it cool? Let's spend a little time digging into some of these archives. Feel free to move around. Make connections. Say hi to everybody who's here. You know, I'm excited to get to know a lot of you a little more. My name is Sylvia, by the way. I don't even know if I said my name, but I think it is. But yeah, please. Any questions before we break out for this? Yeah.
Sort of a I don't know, at another time it was liberation so we can be anarchists. But now we're using that step out. There's no boundaries and borders, I mean, except the ones you feel inside that make sense at the time for liberation. I'm kidding. And everybody is looking for that now because people are just going, what do I have to do? Stay woke. So, so it's not just about, we got our little, thing to hang on to, and this is who we are, but rather we're all together with you. And I think that being glad to come in when I did to hear that being written. And I think people like that.
Alright, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's try to reconvene, in about half an hour and maybe 20 minutes or so, and we'll have a little discussion about what's in the archive.